The point of this lesson is to understand what a declension is, or at least to gain an intuitive understanding of what a declension and what declining in Latin grammar is. So let me start with an example in English. If we have a phrase like Mark hits Julia, how do we know which person hits the other one? Well, in English we know that without ambiguity, thanks to the order. Mark comes first, so Mark is the subject. Julia comes after the verb, it comes in the second place. It comes after, so it's the object. And if we invert the order of these people involved, the function of the people, the function of the nouns in the phrase change accordingly. Now Julia is the subject and Mark is the object. In other words, in English, we know who does the action and who suffers or receives the action thanks to their order in the phrase. And notice that the words remain unchanged. Mark stays Mark and Julia stays Julia. Nothing changed in the shape or the form of the name. And this is English. But in Latin, we do things differently. In Latin, we do have to change the shape of the nouns. We do have to change, more specifically, the endings of the names. To express the same thing in Latin, as in the first scenario, in the first case, we have to write Marcus pulsat. Pulsat means he or she hits. Juliam. And notice the ending, us, am. Very well. We could rewrite this sentence inverting the order. Juliam pulsat Marcus. And since the endings are identical, as you can see, us, Marcus, Marcus, Juliam, Juliam, these two phrases are perfectly equivalent. It's not the order of the nouns in the phrase that tells us which person hits the other one. In Latin, we rely on the endings. And these endings are called, more specifically, case endings. Because the case endings indicate to us the case of that specific of this or that specific noun. Now, look at this. If I write the second phrase in Latin, I have to write, and I will preserve the order of the nouns, just to make the point. Marcum pulsat Julia. Notice that the shapes of the nouns, and more specifically the case endings of the nouns, of the names, have changed because Marcus has become Marcum. Juliam has become Julia. Even though the order is the same, these two phrases mean the opposite. Here, in the first one is Mark who hits Julia, and in the second one is Julia that hits Mark. This is, again, thanks to the endings. In Latin, we say that Marcus and Julia are in the nominative case. And Juliam and Marcum are in the accusative case. The nominative case is usually going to indicate to you the subject of a phrase, the one who does the action, and the accusative case is going to indicate to you the object of a verb or the object of the phrase, the person, or sometimes the thing that receives or suffers the action. And changing the case endings from us to or to a, or from am to a is what we call to decline. We decline a word, more specifically, we decline a noun or an adjective by changing the case endings. And that's why we call this system the declension system of Latin. Now, I will tell you, in Latin, we have actually 6 cases. You don't need to memorize them right now, but you have to be aware that there are 5 cases, and each of them, declining a noun in each of them will assign to that noun a different function in a phrase. So we have also the vocative case, which you use to address someone. So for example, that would be Marque and Julia. Notice that it remains the same for Julia, but it changes for Marcus. Don't worry too much about that case. And we also have the dative case that we translate usually in English using a preposition to or for, and that would be Marco in Latin. So Marco would be something like to Marco or for Marco, Mark. We also have the ablative case that we usually translate to English using the preposition with or by. So depending on the context, it will mean something like with Mark or by Mark. And notice that actually the shape remains the same. But this is not going to be the case for all the nouns that exist in Latin, just for a category of them. And also we have the genitive. The genitive case that we translate to English using usually the preposition of. So Marki will mean something like of Mark or Marks using the Anglo-Saxon genitive. So don't worry right now about all the endings that you will have to learn. Focus on the fact that in Latin, we decline nouns by changing their case endings to use the different 6 cases that exist in Latin for different functions of that noun or for that person or thing in the phrase. And that's what we call a declension. Finally, let me anticipate that in Latin there are 5 declensions. That is, 5 sets of case endings for 5 categories of nouns. And we call them simply first, second, third, fourth, and fifth declension. But that's a topic for another lesson.